Welcome everybody to another episode, if you will, of the Morning Fuel for the Petroleum Alliance. We got some great guests today. I'll remind you that you guys are watching or that aren't panelists are turned off. So please use the chat function to give us questions. This is going to be a little bit different than what we've been doing. We've been doing a lot of informational and downloaded resources for our folks. Today we're going to take a little bit more of a chat approach, and I've got some great guests today. Got David Ramsden-Wood. Everybody probably knows him from his LinkedIn hot take of the day, and I follow him. He's great. He's wrote a great book. What the F is wrong with everybody else? What they didn't teach in business school. Very excited about possibly getting some copies and distributing to our Petroleum Alliance folks, because it's a good book. We're going to talk a little bit about, from his standpoint, we're going to talk a little bit about, what changed in his life. There's a lot of people facing the uncertain times, and he's going to talk a little bit about what propelled him into his career now. We also got Ethan House, everybody knows from EnergyNet. He's our
nobody knows
on that Texas Panhandle guy. He's here in Oklahoma City. He's got a great pulse on what I'm interested in working into. This is the psyche of the marketplace, as far as the capitulation of sellers and where the buyers' heads are right now. So, hey, welcome, guys. I'm going to open up by giving DRW a little bit of let him take the reins a little bit, give a little intro on overall market, and then I'm going to let Ethan do the same, and then we're going to get going on questions.
Sure. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and today we're going to take a little bit of a different tack than the beatdown that I've been giving industry for the last 18 months. Because honestly, like, that time has passed, and now's the time to think about the future. So I'm going to start with a story about 2012 that some of you know. But February 1st, 2012, I went to work, and it was a day like every other else. We just had a big kickoff for our 2020 budget. We were running 4 rigs in the Bakken. There'd been a big confrontation in December when we were going over budget, that we were in the Bakken, and I was suggesting that we shut down Canada because we were in the single greatest resource play that had existed in 2012, which was the Bakken. And why were we ramping down rigs when oil was $100 a barrel? It made no sense. I'd had some friction with my boss, and at noon every day, instead of spending time with my family or with friends or anything like that, I would always go and relax by hitting golf balls at the driving range that was sort of like close to downtown. So I drove over. I got a meeting request for organizational design at 4:30 on a Wednesday, which, if you've ever got that meeting request, I'm going to tell you, they're not actually talking about organizational design. They're planning on firing me. And so what I did was what everyone would do. I declined the meeting request, and I continued to hit balls for about 20 minutes. And anyway, they called and said, hey, when can you come in? I said, I'll be there in 20 minutes. So went in, got the 10 words nobody wants to hear. Thank you for your service. You're no longer required. And came home to my family, who I had rejected for really the last 6 years of my career, but you could argue maybe 12. I had 2 boys who were 5 and 3. We had no health care. We had no income. We were living in a country that my wife wasn't familiar with, and then my kids didn't know their dad. And that was the toughest day of my life, but it was also the best day of my life, because I realized that my career doesn't define me. And so the message for today is, your career doesn't define you either. It's the other things that really matter. So we're going to talk about that. But that was the genesis of what made me write the book, what ultimately led to One Energy, and then with the sale of One Energy, with what led to the hot take of the day. So we'll talk about that, but just a little introduction. And for those on the line, thanks so much for joining, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Fire off, Ethan.
Yeah, Ethan House here. Thanks, Dave, for having me, and DRW, good to see you and have you on here. It's awesome. Should be a great chat. But with EnergyNet, we're a transaction advisor, kind of operate in kind of 0 to 150, 175 million range. But for me, moved over to Oklahoma in 2012. Started with EnergyNet in 2002, right out of college. So I'm literally in my first job since college, which has been a hell of a lot of fun. So been fun growing it. But yeah, so that's kind of where it kicked off for me. But like I said, we're transaction buyers. The market's been crazy. Obviously, we can get into those as we go, and just what kind of where things have been and what people are feeling. And but yeah, I echo that with DRW, because it's it's not what makes you, but kind of what you put out there and the efforts you put in, and trying to power through this weirdness that we've experienced over the last couple of weeks. So glad to be here and excited, and appreciate everybody being on as well.
So all of us have had these inflection points in our career. I had not a similar circumstance where big changes were asked of me in 1994. I'll date myself a little bit. I'd spent about a decade with Texaco, and they were shutting down office after office, and finally they were consolidating all the offices in a city that I didn't live in, and that's when I took my shot at. They basically said, "We'll give you, once you got offered a job, you weren't allowed to get the program, the severance program." I went and talked to my boss about it. They basically said, "You stay here and turn the lights off in Tulsa, and we'll give you the severance." So I kind of was like in a skeleton crew for, months and months, really, and then turned the lights out on the Tulsa office for Texaco. And but again, a similar situation that David was in. You have to make. I really didn't know that check would cash. That didn't have those little Texaco stars on it. I basically did what a lot of people out there right now are thinking about doing, is, scaling back their housing, selling the fancy car. I had a nice car. I got a nice car, but it wasn't as nice as what I had. I had a 4-door Honda Accord, didn't know anybody, lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, and started my company on my first company on the kitchen table, just like everybody in this room and a lot of people that are on the call. A lot of people had to have a very similar story to what DRW just related. And that's why, one of the reasons why I wanted him on here is to tell that story and to show that I've been telling our folks over and over again, such a resilient group of guys and gals that we can get through anything. We've been through everything you could imagine. And they'll find a place. Everybody will land somewhere. And so that's kind of leading into the questions, just kind of broadly speaking, and either one of you can take this. Where do you see, let's say tactical time frame is the rest of this year, and strategic is beyond that. So just give us a rough tactical strategic look at what you think the energy industry is going to look like.
Ethan, I was going to start just on a quick macro, because I think a lot of people really want to compare now, and I think the closest downturn was probably 1985. The difference, in my opinion, in this particular time is if you go back to the world produces 100 million barrels a day of crude. When the lockdown was across the entire world, China, Europe, United States, Africa, everywhere, we were down probably 35 million barrels a day of demand. So we produce 100, and we only were consuming 65, which meant 35 million barrels a day until May, when OPEC said they would cut 10 and the US started reacting. And if you follow me, you know that March 8th was the day I wrote a post that said everything has changed, because the Saudis had protected oil price forever. We can talk more about that, but just accept on that. And the Russians were part of OPEC plus. And once the Russians said, we're no longer part of OPEC plus, we're going to act for ourselves. And the Saudis said, that's unacceptable. We're going to punish you. And in the back of their mind, they knew it would punish the US. Instead of reducing supply to match China's demand, they raised supply. That broke apart OPEC, and in my view, it probably breaks apart OPEC for 2 to 3 years. It took them until May to cut production by just 10 million barrels a day, and U.S. producers were saying, well, I'm hedged. But that meant they kept producing. So we had 35 million barrels a day for between 30 and 60 days that we overproduced as a planet, which we've never done before. What that has done is it puts 1.5 billion barrels in storage, in boats, in tanks, in all the places, and those are owned by banks and financial players. So the moment oil creeps up, they're going to sell those barrels back to the market, and if you have 1.5 billion barrels, you can sell that back to the market at 3 million barrels a day for 500 days. That will depress oil prices $12 a barrel, less than it otherwise would have been had this been just a supply demand, like a supply shock, not a demand shock. So for the rest of this year, we're going to have to burn off all of that storage, which means U.S. production is cut, which means U.S. activity completions are effectively zero, drilling is effectively zero, and declines happen. So that's what's different that we need to understand from the previous. So Ethan, with that, I'll turn it to you on adding context beyond the macro.
Yeah, just I mean, you would say, I guess where we're concerned and what we're seeing, obviously, with the the March kind of 7th time, OPEC, et cetera. We had deals that were still continuing as that took place. They a number of those cratered, of course, because you had buyers looking up all of a sudden that said, what do we do here? This is unprecedented. We don't know where to go with picking these deals up and how to purchase it. So once everybody sort of had that reset, we had a few deals that still continued, that were still done, but at very different numbers. And so, and we saw that. I know it's been referenced in a number of deals, whether it's Alta Mesa or a few others where things went crazy and they obviously couldn't get those across the finish line. So moving forward, where we're concerned, what we have seen is a mass quantity of buyer registrations, of course, because everyone feels like, I think this is just a great time. If you can get a deal done, if you're finding them, then you're probably going to get it at a great price, and hopefully this will move ahead. Where DRW is concerned on his outlook, looking at that couple of year time frame based on oil price and where that's going to land, remains to be seen. But what we're also seeing more of course, is an uptick on the natural gas side, just because it's stayed relatively, where it's been. Obviously it's been depressed for a long time. So I think that what we're going to see more of moving forward is probably more of a focus on the nat gas piece and picking up deals there.
Yeah, and Dave, I'm just going to share my screen if I can here. I hope this works. Can everyone see that? You should be like a really colorful graph.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So I love to use this graph just to really exemplify, because some people don't necessarily know. But if you go back to 2008, this was really the birth of the Bakken, before the Eagle Ford, before the DJ, before horizontal. So this is from Shale Profile Analytics, and this is the horizontal wells, shale wells in the United States and their growth. This is in million barrels a day. So obviously we went through the downturn in 2014, the OPEC driven sort of, we're going to flood the market. But it happened over a much longer period of time. And then subsequent in 2016, some would describe this really as being a 6-year bear market. But the difference was, instead of using equity to drill, we used debt to drill. And so all of this growth, so each of these represent wells drilled in a year. So these are your 2017 wells, these are your 2018 wells, these are 2019. The takeaway from this graph is that of the 8.2 million barrels a day that the U.S. produces from horizontal shale wells, so ex-Alaska, ex-Gulf of Mexico, ex-California, from the shale wells, almost 4 million barrels a day is from wells that were on in the last 365 days. So say again, 1/3 of oil production in the United States are from wells that were not on 365 days ago. What that manifests as is this huge decline shape, which is like 40%. And the reason that people are now pivoting, saying natural gas is where the good is because the average oil well has a 4,000 to 5,000 GOR. If you take 4 million barrels a day of US oil out of the market because there's very little capital activity, and we all know that that's what's happening, you're going to end up declining 20 BCF out of 110 BCF a day market, which is 20%. So gas goes from oversupplied with lots of firm transport capacity that was not being used in Appalachia to undersupplied, and all those guys are going to drill the hell out of it. Now, it will take time for oil to decline and for this to manifest, but that's why you see the gas strip is not $1.75 12 months out. It's more like $2.50. But it's why the oil strip is 35 out 12 months, because there's all this global demand and gas just doesn't really experience that. So when Ethan talks about the pivot from oil to gas, you know, obviously oil's not going anywhere and gas isn't going anywhere, but oil barrels are cheaper to produce elsewhere in the world than they are in the US. In the US, we need 50, and the Saudis don't want 50 anymore, because now they've actually thrown their punch. In October 2014, it wasn't about the US, because we didn't know the Permian was the Permian then. What that was about was punishing Russia for the invasion of Crimea. And so the OPEC was punishing Russia at the behest of the US government. And Russia has waited 6 years, including funding anti-frat campaigns in the United States, to punish the US. And so in March, when the global demand was a little bit weak, Russia said, now is our time to punish the US. Now we're going to do it. And the Saudis said, well, this is the 1-2 punch. We can knock out Russia and we can knock out US. And now we can transform our economy, which is why oil and gas are so different.
That's a big decoupling story. How range bound do you think natural gas is?
I mean, to me, again, macro, the Marcellus and Haynesville have shown productivity improvements and generally ability to grow. Haynesville's smaller, so it will have less impact, but there's a lot of guys in the Marcellus that can grow at 250. And when you look at guys like Antero, they were spending $250 million a year in firm transport to pay for pipeline space they weren't using. So at $1.75, they can't drill because their fixed cost without drilling a well is $1.90. At 250, it now starts becoming very productive. And so there will be times where gas goes to 3 or 350, Dave, to answer your question, because of winter or storage or pipe or disruptions, etc. But I think that really the gas will be 250. And so if you have natural gas assets that work at 250 today, I think you're going to be well positioned to take advantage of that. And I think the decline in oil will also make room for more liquids, where liquids prices have been depressed. We're going to have benefit there. And then the last one is, if my thesis is right, that the US declines 4 to 5 million barrels a day in the next 18 months, we're going to need to import 4 to 5 million barrels more of light sweet crude, which is all going to be coming from the Middle East or from areas like that, which if there was already US consumers who hated oil to begin with, the move to electric vehicles, I think, will accelerate now, because there will be an anti-Middle East, anti-Russia movement and a pro-America, make America great again, build it here, power it here, which natural gas can do. So to me, natural gas is the massive winner out of this, and oil in the US is the massive loser out of this.
I think directionally that's accurate. I do think that the what's up for grabs is how long that's going to take for that to happen. That's the can we obviously we got a big scare, and I'd like for you guys to comment on this. We have a big supply chain scare. I mean, there's things that we should make here. Period. Pharmaceuticals, PPE.
I didn't wear my mask today.
Yeah, I'm shocked that dealer doesn't normal scarfing, but there are things that we need to make here, and that to me that puts natural gas, things that have vertical natural gas. We constantly talk to our legislator and our governor and our leadership here in Oklahoma about being a third world country where we ship our raw material off for people to add value in other states or other countries now.
Yeah.
Want to make more things here. And so if you were knowing what you guys, I think in general, all of us are thinking about the same way about the macro. What do we tell What do we tell that guy or girl that's a junior at University of Oklahoma in petroleum engineering? What do we tell them?
Ethan, you take that one first.
Man, I love this business so much. The people are amazing, and then probably that's more of anything is just the people, because you look at how resilient this industry's been over the course of all the years that DRW's been talking about. I mean, you look at what 85, I think you were talking about. I remember as a kid. I mean, again, I was young, but I mean, this was what 88 or so when oil was $9-10 a barrel. Living in Houston, it was just obviously very depressing. Again, you're a kid, so you have very limited scope. But, but the people in this industry have been just so great, and watching what's taken place through administrations, through, in spite of basically everything that's taken place, we've done our best to sort of fight back. So, on the engineering piece, it's a tough one. I'll leave that one to the engineers, and I'll let DRW kind of handle that, or you, Dave. But as far as an engineering student, obviously I think there's some opportunity here. Depending on when you're in it, we're going to see a big shift in people leaving. I know we've obviously seen that already with just the layoffs, but even just people just losing kind of faith in the industry and not wanting to have to deal with this every so often. And how often are these dips going to take place? So, granted, I would like to say stay the course for those, but I'm going to have to pitch it over to DRW on the engineering piece. What would you tell that person?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's funny. I had lunch yesterday with a 20-year-old who's going in to be a junior in his degree, and so Dave, to your point, how long does it last? I mean, I think that the cycle of low prices, and by low I mean below 50, and I think that the U.S. really needs 50 to even compete for capital. I think that cycle is between 24 and 36 months, depending on war. And what we know coming out of the coronavirus is that a lot of developing nations are going to be a lot poorer because they don't have the financial infrastructure to support their populace. And so supply chain disruption and or fascists taking power with a military coup, which then leads to geopolitical instability that we saw in the early 90s and through 2000, I think is a risk. So for students who are like juniors or sophomores, I probably wouldn't take geology, if I'm honest. I probably wouldn't do land. And the reason I say those is we already have so many professionals that are skilled at that if you want an oil finder, you're going to go to a guy who's done it for 10, 5, 8, 13 years and had training at a major. And so as we start developing bumps in Nebraska or things in Kansas when oil comes back or things in Oklahoma, old school geologists, I think, will be able to cope. But as a new student, I would not do geology. For engineering, what I told the kid yesterday was diversify and expect to do something in the chemical field. And so if you could do downstream, midstream, chemicals, manufacturing, and build, like be open to different degrees or different industries. Because one of the things that made our industry so great wasn't what made our industry so great in 2000. In 2000, what made our industry great was there was no #MeToo. So all the office parties were like full of booze and they were super fun because we all drank hard and partied hard. But from 2008 to 2020, the reason our industry was fun was because there was so much capital and, quite honestly, not a lot of oversight relative to the amount we were spending. And so I think the industry will change and the people are what make it, but other industries have great people too. So I guess I wouldn't be fixated on being in energy because the big boom, the big bull run that happened from 08 to 14, we're in a bear market and it's going to be hard to come out of it. So our industry will be different, much more cost control, much more like coal or much more like manufacturing than it has been historically. So that would be my sort of guidance to students. And then for those who are in it, don't be afraid to pivot. There's no shame in saying this was my part of my journey for now, and now I'm on a different path. And we'll talk about that in the later answer.
One of the things that is true and has always been true is the low cost guy wins. If you can produce, like you just indicated earlier, if you're a developer of natural gas resources and you make money at $2.50 and you make a solid return, you're going to do well I think, in this environment. The
Absolutely.
one of the things that we keep telling our young technical folks is that we keep telling them that this is a technology business. This is the cutting edge. The amount of dollars that flow in and out of this business just inherently lend themselves to always trying to build a better mousetrap for everything. And so the technology that's going to be required, that's probably a good segue into a question is what is the next technology that's going to make a quantum leap? Quietly, as we've been the whole big horizontal change, things like bit technology quietly helped us along here, and so there's a lot of subtleties that helped us. But where do you guys, and it's crystal ball time, but where do you guys see looking out farther, 10, 15, 25 years from now, what technologies are going to develop that will make this even more efficient?
Ethan, you want to take a shot at that first, or want me to do it?
Unmute. Sorry, go ahead.
So Dave, I think it's a big question. So the two things that I think really change out of this, natural gas, they always say start a business with a moat. That's Warren Buffett's phrase, is what are the defense mechanisms that prevent other people from competing with you? And on the natural gas side, our moat is the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. And when gas is $2.50 and we have a lot of it, then it's very hard to put gas on ships and bring it to the US to compete. So it is a domestic market. Now, we were flooded with gas because of associated oil gas. And so we were looking to export 6 BCF a day and grow, which made us compete with Qatar and Russia, which is one of the reasons Russia was so anti-frac and so anti-US oil, was they're the winners when we lose. But natural gas has a moat. So do we need technology? For sure. I do think that frac technology has gone pretty far. I think that compression technology is probably going to be a big one. And then how do we recomplete efficiently? And how do we not have orphan wells? I think those are going to be some macro themes in the next 20 years. On oil, and again, this is a big proposition, but stick with me. Saudi Aramco went public, and they have a 53-year reserve life index at 10 million barrels a day. So if they produce 10 million barrels a day flat for 53 years, they're done. Now, Exxon has a 17-year reserve life index, which means that in a normal world, Saudi Arabia should triple their production to 30 million barrels a day in order to be the same as Exxon. And so if they can do that at $35 a barrel, which I believe they can, I think Saudi has now realized that the world might stop using oil and that peak demand, while it's not here, is coming. And so they don't have 53 years. They have to accelerate that. So to me, no matter how much technology we do here, I think the Saudis are going to grow production to 15, 20, 25, 30 million barrels a day. So they exhaust the kingdom of oil before the world stops needing it. And that will make it very hard to innovate with EOR and polymers and all the things that need $70 or $80 a barrel. Because I think the Saudis are going to do their absolute best to keep oil in the 40 to 50 range so the US can't restart the engine and they totally control the world.
So is that a question, is that are you thinking like the environmental shift on where that pushes? Obviously, I mean, with, elections coming, et cetera, or what we're watching on that side, is there or the oil piece, meaning that people are the world is moving away from it, where's that driver?
Yeah, I mean, there's $46 trillion of worldwide funds driven a lot from Europe that are anti-fossil fuel, not just won't invest, like divest fossil fuels. I think it's crazy. If we had a better business model, they would invest. And US companies have the technology that could be applied in other countries. And I think that that's an upshot. But every other country has national oil companies. And those national oil companies control the entire market. Whereas our free market has hundreds and hundreds of companies that all act on their own best interest. And so it's a bit about the world on fossil fuels, but the American consumer, if we see we're importing more oil and there's this big move for green and wind and solar and natural gas and nuclear or whatever it is, there is going to be a move where people don't want to invest unless you're a national oil company. And it's your only product for the entire kingdom of Saudi Arabia. There's a reason they went and bought Hilton and Carnival Cruise Lines and all those stocks in the downturn, is they're trying to capture ownership of companies by using petrodollars. So I think that's the driver, Ethan. Again, we'll see, but that's why I'm really bearish on oil for the next period. But gas is just money penny.
Gotcha.
That's great. We're kind of getting close to our witching hour here and running out of time. I think I'd like to have each of start with Ethan, kind of some closing thoughts.
Yeah, happy to. I'm just currently unmuted. Okay, so so moving ahead, and I know, I follow obviously Hot Take and a bunch of others, and I think I think a lot of people have talked about. What you're going to see is some of the larger companies, better positioned companies, grabbing up assets, controlling basins, working to control basins, whether that's, on the acquisition side with a lot of these companies that are in trouble. As we've talked about, and it's no secret, a number of companies currently going through bankruptcy. How it looks moving forward, what we've seen in the markets, currently, as I said, natural gas looking forward, pricing wise, you've seen things, I'd say like in the royalty space where you had an average of kind of 82,000 per flowing barrel as a metric is now around 40. Same on the operation side, et cetera. Non-ops, very difficult to place. The uncertainty in the marketplace with operators and with a lot of these companies and not knowing where they're headed keeps buyers on the sidelines with a lot of cash. And we've got a lot of buyers with a lot of cash. And so I think those guys are waiting for the right deal. No one's rushing out there and just throwing money down. Everybody's gotten a lot pickier on the buy side for sure. We're still going to see, I think the big guys are going to continue to sell. The publics, we're still seeing deals from Chevron and Merit and XTO and all those companies are going to continue to divest, which is a great pickup for a lot of people. A lot of those companies that smaller companies that can pick those assets up that are non-core to them, but that can be a company maker for somebody else. So I would say, moving ahead, it's difficult. It's tough to sell in a lot of cases, but I think it's going to happen and we're seeing it. So if you can position yourself in the right way, be available, have dry powder, be able to pick up deals, I think you're going to succeed here. And that's about it on my side, what we're looking at. Go ahead.
Could you talk just a little about the bid-ask spread and why that exists and why assets aren't moving? Because I think that's one of the things, like everyone wants to buy, but the fundamental structure of the bid-ask spread.
Yeah. So obviously depending on, where the bank there's so, as you said earlier, DRW, the debt piece here is the big thing. So what do you see trading? Is it, are you trading it? Is there cash now? Do we look at some sort of future production payment? Are we trading paper? Are we using stock? Are we, how do you pick these deals up? Why that took place initially, really the bid-ask spread's been going on, I'd say through, I think 19, kind of 18, moving into 2019, we had a lot of deals done, but they were more difficult. And as we moved into 20, of course, that's gotten even worse. So, as far as, where someone can sell, I think if you look at the investments that took place and what people were buying over the course of the last few years, and what they spent versus what they need to sell for now and can't possibly get anywhere close to that is the biggest problem that we've seen. It's just you spend a lot of money on the land side or on the mineral side or buying up this stuff in front of somebody, et cetera, or hoping you're in front of somebody. And in the end, you spend a lot of money on minerals that are worth half, if not a quarter of what they were, and or a producing asset as well.
And I think that's the key point there is again, what's different is the structure and nature of complex financial transactions coming out of 2008. We're a lot more complex financially today than we were in 1985. And there's so much debt that the asset value at strip is below debt right now. So it's better for a company to go through bankruptcy and get a new balance sheet, which means they're not going to sell, than it is to sell, which is why I think it's a 2 to 3 year process. So David, my closing kind of comments, what I want to leave people with is going into the coronavirus in March, the unemployment rate in this country was 3.7%. And for those who were in industry in 2013, I want you to remember what the industry looked like in 2013 when unemployment was effectively zero. We had just anybody was in any seat. People could jump jobs all they wanted for more money. And there wasn't a correlation to skill necessarily with the job people had. We now have 36 million Americans who are out of work, which is the most in the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, we lost 3 million jobs. We have lost 36 million jobs in 6 weeks. And that number will peak between 45 and 50 million, if not more. And in July, when the economy reopens, people will discover that a lot of the people who think they're furloughed, and I mean across all industries, there will be no job for them to go back to, which means that we'll have an unemployment rate of 20%. Now, why is that important for you? The people in energy, I think, are the greatest professionals who work under the most incredible conditions in the most complex regulatory, safety, multidimensional, financial, regulatory, government, all the things. We have skills that now everyone can compete for the jobs that companies need to fill, and every company is now distressed. And so don't limit yourself to energy, because Amazon needs help, Google needs help, Walmart needs help, Macy's needs help, Hilton needs help, Southwest Airlines needs help. And there will be, so from a job market, there will be so many jobs. They need smart, creative, hardworking, wonderful professionals. So that's opportunity number one. Opportunity number two is the Democratic states, and this is nothing about Democrats or Republicans, but New York, California, and Illinois shut down their economies and have no plans to reopen. And what that means is their tax revenue on a deficit that already exists, on a massive debt which already exists, taxes will raise for citizens, especially for wealthy citizens, but for all citizens, and social services will drop. Schools will close, hospitals will close, police departments will close, towns will shutter and declare bankruptcy. And what that means for the populace is those people will not want to live in those places. No one would live in New York if you couldn't go out to dinner every night and go to a show and weren't being paid $1 million a year. So those people are going to move, and states like Oklahoma that have reopened, that show entrepreneurial spirit, that have cheap office space, that have affordable living, and have an incredible workforce are going to be the net winners. So work with your government, work with your state, work with your local to attract those businesses and those startups to start in Oklahoma, where life is cheap, life is great, life is awesome, and the people are amazing, because that is how the economy will move forward post-COVID, where Oklahoma will be a winner and New York and California will be a loser. So that to me is the opportunity that comes out of this. And so I think be very hopeful and trust your path, never give up, and take every meeting you can to see what the next break is going to be for you.
Agreed.
That's great. I would like to add a few closing things after listening to him. Thanks, guys. That was absolutely what I was hoping we'd hear. Couple of general thoughts, and maybe something a little bit more silver lining and positive for the current workforce. One of the things that DRW mentioned in his discussion is the start with the moat. Well, the moat can also be the barrier. I always call that barrier of entry, but there is a huge barrier of entry for companies of size to acquire and operate stripper oil and gas production. They just doesn't move the needle. So generationally, there are families, and we have member companies in the Petroleum Alliance where they've literally on their third generation of pumping their wells and what have you. And there's not all generational producers have heirs that are wanting to be in this business. So our baby boomer group, which are now the youngest, are 58 years old. I know that because I am the last year of the baby boomers. So this is you're seeing the turning of the page here, and as we all start ushering stage left, there actually will be consolidation for the first time. I always wondered, as industries mature, they consolidate. You know, and in the 50s there were literally tens of car companies. Now there's 4. You know, it just happens. Economies of scale, a number of things. Our industry never really consolidated because there was an error, or there was the barrier of entry wasn't as high. We built as you pointed out, we built over the last 6-8 years, our house was built on debt. It might as well have been built on cards. You know, it could not survive this kind of this kind of oscillation in the pricing and what have you. So I think there is more opportunity for those. I think there'll be, every time I've seen in Oklahoma City this situation. Not this isn't exactly. I agree 100%. This is something new, but it has elements of old downturns where people lose their jobs. And every time I've seen that happen, I've seen it explode into, you know, a company goes down and it explodes into 30 new companies, and they're all small and they're all getting after it. Unfortunately, capital is going to be a little bit harder to get, but hopefully, you know, if you can show that you have the better mousetrap, I can operate these wells at this because I live 2 miles from there, and I know how to do it because I was trained at XYZ Oil and Gas Company. So, to me, that pivot is coming in Oklahoma. We kind of led the charge, guys. We're over 90% down on our rig count, and we got there faster than anybody else. So, and part of that's the rock we have, to be honest. But part of it is just we have some pretty smart companies that operate here that said, "Hey, there's a better time to do this." So I would leave everybody with. I think that Americans in America will get more isolationist than we predict right now. That which means supply chain replacement will grow. I like the word repatriation, but there's a lot of words being thrown around about how do we bounce back from this. And I like let's make it here. Let's find verticals in Oklahoma that use natural gas, and that should be our war cry.
Sure.
And I think overall, I appreciate you both for being positive. It's we got a long way to dig out, but no, everybody's got a shovel. So yeah. let's not cover each other up with it. Let's forge our own futures. So appreciate it, guys. And thank everybody for being on Morning Fuel this morning. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, everybody. Reach out anytime.